Hello and welcome. My name is Leah Kopke, and this is my 3D modeling podcast, Ambient 3D Animations. Today we're going to go over the instance object, how it works, what is the difference between instance, render instance, multi-instance, as well as many of the benefits that go with working with the instance object or instances in general. They help reduce the amount of memory you use, which helps reduce lag, speed up rendering, and make your workflow more efficient. It can also help you save a smaller file size. It'll also help you make universal changes throughout a scene if you have many objects. So it is very helpful in many ways. Let's go ahead and jump into Cinema 4D and go over these settings. We started a project 3D modeling a library in the last several episodes, and this tool is actually really helpful for dense scenes with a lot of objects. So I wanted to use this as an example for a little bit and talk about how I used it here so that you have a real world example. So I had made all these books as instances. I could adjust their color individually, even though they were all instances. I could adjust their size and scale and deform them. And I'll talk a little bit about how this works. And I also made an instance of this light so that I could have a duplicate, but not have all the heavy data of the geometry being duplicated as well. Because when you create a render instance, it links to the original's geometry so that it doesn't have those additional polygons within your scene. So you only have the polygons from the original that it is referencing. It also can make changes universal. So let's say you're working on a render for a client and you are doing an animation of a building that has 50 industrial lights. And they have a change. The client would like a change. They'd like you to change the color of all the lights and have them all have a new finish. You don't want to click on each one individually to update it. So that's where instances come in helpful. If you make a change to the original, you can also make changes to all the others. You can also use it in a way where you can change each one individually. So let's go ahead and talk about how that works in another file. So I'm going to just drop in a sphere here because regardless of if you're new or you've been 3D modeling that library, we all have easy access to spheres, so it's a great example. And let's go ahead and talk about where you can find this instance object. If you hold a click on here, you'll find the instance. If you want to be like me and add it up here so you don't have to keep going in here, clicking and finding it that way, you can search for it in your commander but with Shift-C, and then you can drag and drop it to anywhere within your UI, and there you go, you have the button over there. So that's helpful. So the interesting thing about this is if we have an instance of this sphere, I had this selected and then I clicked this, and when you do that, you get a instance of the object you had selected. Let's say I don't have anything selected and I create an instance. It'll be empty, and it'll turn red because it has nothing linked. It's not referencing anything. If I wanted to reference something, I can drag and drop the sphere in here, and now it's all referencing that sphere. And you can make duplicates of instances and so on and so forth, and they will all be referencing this original sphere. And none of these duplicates will hold any geometry if we change this to render instance. So render instance, what that does is it makes a copy of the original that you can render using Redshift or any other render third party, and you can have a duplicate that uses up less memory because it's referencing the geometry of this one instead of having geometry of its own. So it has fewer polygons. You basically have less polygons in your scene. If I change this to garage shading, you can see these have quite a few polygons. And if we have a really, really detailed object and we don't want thousands and thousands of additional polygons added to our scene, if we had 50 spheres or something like that, then this comes in really helpful. If you make any changes to the original, it makes that change to the others. So that is also helpful. Now let's talk about instances and colors and materials. So I'll put a material in here, and just to make it easy to see, I'm going to make it green. I'm going to make a duplicate. I'm going to make this one yellow. Make a duplicate. Let's make this one red. Or I guess that looks more pink. That's okay. I just want these all to be different colors so that I can show this as an example. I can make these instances different colors if I'd like to. And that's a way to make all the books on the bookshelves different colors if you'd like. Now let's say I decide that I actually would like them all to be this color. And I want to change all of these instances all at once. Well, the way to do that is to drag and drop this to the original. Because whenever you add a color to the original object that all the instances are referencing, that will override whatever color you have added to the individual instances. Whatever color is on the original, whatever material is on the original, will override anything you add here. So I see that confuse people a lot. They're like, why can't I just drag and drop this red color onto the instance and have it turn red? It's because you have a color on your original. So that's important to realize. Let's talk about some more of these settings. The instance option here does not reduce the amount of geometry you have in your scene. So it is a duplicate. It still has the benefits of being able to change the color universally. It still has the benefits of being able to adjust the original's geometry and have that change happen to all the others. If I make this editable and I start changing some polygons, it will change with all of them just the same. Now the downside of it is it does take up more memory, but where this comes in really useful is if you have instances of an animated original. And that'll come more into play if you're using something like the cloner, because other objects also use instances. The cloner makes duplicates of objects. The matrix you could use with the instance option. So these settings are used in a lot of different places. So when you learn this, you've learned the settings for actually a lot of tools. The instance mode recognizes animation. So you could offset the animation of several objects, but you'll only be able to see it if you change the instance mode of those objects to instance. Render instance won't recognize animation. It won't work. You can't use render instance or multi-instance for offsetting animation of instances. Like if you had a crowd of people and they were all instances, you'd need to use this one and not the render instance, because they'll all be moving at the same time if you choose render instance. But the render instance is the one that saves you data. It's the one that makes it easier to have a lighter file, less lag, which can be helpful if you have a really dense scene. If you have a ton of trees and you have a forest, you'll want to use render instance for all those trees, because you can still make adjustments to these. You can scale them in here. You can rotate them. You can make some adjustments to these. Now, the thing that doesn't work is deformers. You can't use deformers with the render instance. If you change it to instance mode, you can deform things, though, that are copies. The multi-instance is the same thing as the render instance, except that it takes all the instances and makes them into one single object to reduce memory. Now, sometimes the multi-instance, doesn't work for every situation, so that's why there's still this render instance option that uses slightly more memory. But they're all pretty similar. Now, let's imagine we have this very dense scene in here. I'm waiting for this to load, and we have so many books. What if I click on this instance and I want to find the original? Well, that's where this comes in helpful. You can click Show in Manager, and it will take you to the original object so you can find it. Something else you can do is say Select Element, and it'll select the original so you can find it. You can clear this if you want to remove this object from being the reference. And as an example in here, if we wanted this sphere to be the reference, the original, instead of the other one, we could click Swap with Reference. And now this one over on the right is the original instead of the other one. And it's controlling the rest. I want to talk a little bit about how instances work with lights. So, rendering with a light that it has an instance of it. So it's basically making a copy of it. So it doesn't save you any memory in terms of lighting within a scene. But what it does do is if you make an adjustment to the original, this will take a second. I'm going to delete these spheres. If you make an adjustment to the original and we change the temperature of the light, it'll change for all the others. So it still gives you a way to control the lighting in a universal way. So it can be very helpful for that. If you have a ton of street lamps, or if you have a ton of industrial lights in a building, or anything like that, this will give you the ability to change them all at once. Or if you have a string of lights, or something like that, or a Christmas tree with lights on it, it'll make it easier to change all of them at once. So it's helpful for that. So that covers all the settings for instance. Something to keep in mind is that the render instance doesn't support Sketch and Tune yet, at least as of the time I'm recording this. That could potentially change in the future. Instances can be used in situations with cloners with an array. So cloner, the array tool in here, uses instances. You can also find Mo instance, which is just another kind of instance that works with the Mo graph system. Slightly different than the other instance, but very similar concept. You can use instances with particles and the matrix option as well. So it's really helpful, and you'll find these settings, instance, render instance, and multi-instance, in tons of tools inside of Cinema 4D. I hope this helps you in your project, and if you'd like to learn more 3D modeling tools or 3D Modelist library, please hit the bell, subscribe, hit like so you'll be notified when the next episode comes out. I hope to see you here next time on Ambient 3D Animations.